Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Friday the 12th of August. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 170 of the illegal Russian war of aggression. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has told officials to stop talking to reporters about Kyiv's military tactics against Russia, saying such remarks were frankly irresponsible. The president's comments come after news organizations cited unidentified officials, saying that Ukrainian forces were responsible for blasts that destroyed a Russian airbase in Crimea on Tuesday, despite Kyiv declining to say whether it was behind the explosions. The UN has urged a demilitarized zone around Zaporizhia nuclear plant. Ukraine's nuclear energy company said it has been shelled 5 times by Russian forces on Thursday, resulting in the staff being unable to change their shifts. Ukraine's Energoatom agency said the plant has continued to operate normally. The United States supports the calls for a demilitarized zone around the Zaporizhia plant after fighting involving Russian and Ukrainian forces in the vicinity of the plant, a State Department spokesman said yesterday. The UK's Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, said that Russia's invasion of Ukraine had faltered and was starting to fail, as he pledged more financial and military support to Ukraine. Russia has doubled the number of airstrikes on Ukraine's military positions and civilian infrastructure compared with the previous week, a Ukrainian Brigadier General Alexei Hromov said yesterday. Ukraine aims to evacuate 2/3 of the residents from areas it controls in the eastern battleground region of Donetsk before winter, partly out of concern people won't be able to stay warm amid war-damaged infrastructure, the Deputy Prime Minister said on Thursday. The government's plans to evacuate some 220,000 people out of around 350,000, including 52,000 children, Irina Bereshchuk told a news conference. And Ukraine expects $3 billion of US financial aid to arrive in August, and a further $1.5 billion in September, its finance minister, Serhiy Marchenko, said on Thursday. Marchenko said the payments were part of a $7.5 billion financial aid package agreed by Ukraine and the US at the start of the summer, and he said it would be used to finance critical spending, such as healthcare and pension costs. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined this evening by a regular contributor. Linda Fabiani served as a member of our Scottish Parliament from 1999 until she retired at the Scottish election last year. When she retired, Linda was the Deputy Presiding Officer of our Parliament. Linda, good evening. How are you keeping?
I'm keeping absolutely fine. Thank you very much, Andrew. Hello, everyone.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, and thank you for joining us this evening on Broadcasting Scotland, Linda. Our first story this evening is that the Scottish Government's super sponsor scheme has now offered sanctuary to 10,056 displaced people from Ukraine to travel safely to Scotland, far exceeding the original commitment to host 3,000 people. The total number of people from Ukraine offered a place in Scotland through the super sponsor scheme and the UK Government Homes for Ukraine scheme with individual sponsors is more than 13,000. That means we're hosting 16.5% of the total UK population share to date. To accommodate more displaced Ukrainians whose visas have been approved under the super sponsor scheme, the Scottish Government has chartered a second passenger ship, the MS Ambition, to be located in Glasgow. The ship, which is due to be fully operational by September, will provide accommodation for up to 1,750 people with the same level of facilities and support currently available to those moored in Edinburgh. The Minister with Special Responsibility for Refugees from Ukraine, Neil Gray, said the Scottish Government's super sponsor scheme has now enabled more than 10,000 people to come to Scotland following the humanitarian crisis caused by Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Unfortunately, there is currently no end in sight of the war. We are firmly focused on supporting displaced people from Ukraine who are seeking sanctuary in Scotland as they flee the war in their homeland. So, Linda, firstly, the broader point. Based on the UK government data, there have been 40,343 applications by Ukrainian refugees to live in Scotland, and 30,668 visas have been issued. Now, all things being equal, with 10 times the population, you might then expect there to have been 400,000 applications and 300,000
Mm.
applications, via 300,000 visas issued to live in England. But there were only 86,000 applications and 77,000 visas granted. So Scotland has been on those numbers about 4 times as welcoming. Do you think, does that tell us something about Scotland?
It's always an interesting point when we discuss these issues, because it's terribly easy to get complacent and say, oh, look how great we are compared to everyone else. But when you look at the facts, what Scotland has done consistently over the last years has elected and re-elected a government since 2007, the SNP government, who has been very, very upfront about support for asylum seekers, support for refugees, immigration, workers, freedom of movement, and always stood up and said that people are welcome here in Scotland. So the fact that a government that says these things is re-elected in the way that it is and given support in the way that it is, with satisfaction levels, etc., even in such hard times, does indeed tell a story. And if you contrast that with the xenophobic government that is currently in Westminster and has been there for a long time, that tells another story. It tells a story about Scotland currently being a very different kind of nation with different ideals and different needs, of course, are not recognised by the UK government. So it's not about Scots being better than anybody else in the UK or anything else. It's about a common philosophy of fairness and people who elect a government to carry on that common philosophy of fairness. And I have to say, I wouldn't for a minute say it's only the SNP. Even I would say the government that was in Scotland and the Scottish Parliament between 1999 and 2007 was a Labour Lib Dem coalition. They did some fairly good things in these regards too. I don't think they did enough. I don't think Jack McConnell stood up enough against Westminster about the rights of asylum seekers, for example, and on raids. But he did start some schemes to have people come and live in Scotland, which were then, of course, cancelled further down the line. So I think it's been an ongoing Scottish thing that we recognise the value of immigrants and people with different experiences coming to become part of Scottish society.
Thanks, Linda. That's a good point that you make. It's not necessarily about the politics, it's about doing the right thing by other people who are in need.
Yeah.
Now, I would just mention the MS Ambition, which is the next vessel that the Scottish Government has chartered. The current charter, the MS Victoria, which is moored in Leith, is the vessel that houses Ukrainian refugees. Now, a few weeks ago in the Express, the headline was "Outrage as Nicola Sturgeon forces Ukraine refugees onto cruise ship in
Yeah.
betrayal of plan." After that, the Express was "Sturgeon's cruise ship with rooms smaller than prison cells takes Ukrainian refugees." But in fact, the people are actually on board the vessel, on board the Victoria, say that I've told BBC Scotland about the restaurants, children's play areas with toys, books, shops, a laundry, Wi-Fi access. A witness called Nicol Bilous, who's 19 from Kiev, told the BBC the conditions in the ship are better than we could have dreamed of and are very grateful to the Scottish people
Mhm.
for this accommodation. He said there's Ukrainian TV channels, all the signs are in Ukrainian on the ship, and most of the staff are Ukrainian. And he was saying that last night for his dinner he did borscht, and he couldn't believe it. He said, "We were so happy to have this, as it is our hearts." So, firstly, thanks to Professor John Robertson for pointing this out. But secondly, Linda, why do you, and this relates back to the answer you gave before, but why do you think the unionist press and the right wing press are trying to weaponize refugees, weaponize European refugees?
The right wing press, let's look at the Express, look at the. There's a column in the Daily Mail today that I wouldn't even voice some of the offensive things that are in it about Scottish people. I suppose, on the one hand, they're trying to preserve self preservation. Part of the establishment maintain it as it is because that's what suits them. But there's another aspect to this. They're running scared. You know, it's the SNP bad thing all the time. It's the independence bad, and it's now coming into Scottish people bad, Scotland bad, and it's because they're running scared. They cannot, with any conscience at all, deny Scotland's democracy about having the right to determine their own future through another referendum. They're coming out with all the parrot fashion lines, as are the UK government and some of the Labour supporters. But the bottom line is they know it's coming and they are running scared because, as I always say, if Scotland was so useless or such a drain, why the heck are they so desperate to hang on to us? Well, those of us who've looked at it seriously know why they're so desperate to hang on to us, because Scotland is a resource that the UK feels it needs, and they don't want to lose that resource. So that's what it is. And can I just say an ending bit? I love the name of that ship in Glasgow, MS Ambition, isn't it? Yeah.
It tells us all we need to know. Thank you, Linda. You're absolutely right. Let's move on to our next item this evening now, because the UK's recovery from the pandemic stalled in the 3 months to June when the economy contracted by 0.1%. That's according to official figures that revealed the
Yeah.
weakening outlook for the UK, which is expected to enter a recession later this year. Exports fell and consumer spending contracted to push the UK closer to a long period of contraction that the Bank of England expects will stretch to the end of 2023. Economists had forecast a bigger fall in output of 0.2% in the second quarter. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research said that the contraction in the second quarter meant a recession had already begun, brought about by a collapse in consumer confidence that has caused households to curtail spending and a decline in activity across the services sector. The cost of living crisis, as inflation heads towards 13% by the end of this year and energy bills soar, is expected to weigh heavily on household spending and pile further pressure on businesses already struggling with rising costs. Commenting, the SNP Shadow Chancellor, Alison Thulis MP, said, "Households up and down the country face poverty and destitution, and businesses, not the subject of the energy cap, risk folding as the cost of living crisis spirals out of control. The last thing we need at this time is an unemployment crisis." The Tory government continues to prioritise the leadership race instead of supporting people and businesses with sky-high bills. Successive Westminster governments have created a situation where the UK is lagging behind other countries with the worst growth, productivity, poverty, and inequality of our European neighbours. Even Liz Truss admitted that the past 20 years of Westminster economic policy had been a failure, conveniently ignoring the fact that she backed the very Tory policies that have hammered the economy, including a disastrous Brexit and a decade of austerity cuts. But given both the Tories and Labour remain wedded to a hard Brexit and dismantling the social security safety net, it is clear that there is no change forthcoming from Westminster. Independence, she continued, is the only way Scotland can build a fairer, more prosperous country. So, Linda, firstly, on the point of the 10 years of austerity cuts, health was the biggest reason the economy contracted as the test and trace and vaccine programs were wound down, while many retailers also had a tough quarter. Now, that's according to
Mhm.
Darren Morgan, who's the Director of Economic Statistics at the ONS. So, if we're to follow what Darren Morgan tells us, does this not blow George Osborne's decade of austerity completely out of the water? It proves that if you
Mhm.
defund or stop economic activity in, for example, the health service, the economy shrinks.
Yeah. It's one of the great myths that a strong public sector inhibits growth, economic growth, and well-being. It doesn't, and I think that's been proved more and more. Um, I was interested in your comments about Liz Truss. I'm just fascinated every day by Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, and indeed the Tories generally. Um, it's as if these two have just appeared out of the clouds and come down and that they've never been involved in anything ever before and they're going to save the country. It's absolutely crazy. This complete lack of taking any responsibility for where the country is at the moment. And we keep. I was been trying to keep up to date with it. You know, the Bank of England are saying there's going to be a full recession come October, and that this last quarter has shown it's on track for recession by October. But the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, they're saying we're already in recession. It's already begun. And the Resolution Foundation is saying that the outlook is bleak. And nobody's in any doubt that the outlook, but I'm not seeing any action by those that really have the levers of power to try and change it. What I'm seeing is a UK government that seems to be just relying on the Bank of England to bring inflation under control and get us out of recession. And looking at past actions and past comments by Conservatives in particular over many, many years, there's certain things that they're quite willing to do to bring inflation under control, to see the economy grow. And I'm starting to get really suspicious that they're seeing the greater divide between those who have and those who have not, that they're seeing low paid work, lack of fair work, and indeed unemployment as a price that they're willing to pay as a UK political construct to get what they see as important and the economy back in growth, with absolutely no look at all at the well-being of citizens. And when you look at what neighbouring countries, like well, take Ireland straight away, is doing, and neighbouring countries across the Channel and mainland Europe, the UK is doing very, very badly. But to go back to the right-wing press that you mentioned in the last item we discussed, they report things as if Britannia's still ruling the waves and that everything's fine, and nobody else can quite keep up with us because we're so wonderful. And I really despair at what I see as sort of Alice through the looking glass society, that people never actually get the truth. And when I look at the BBC and its selective reporting, and the press, which is almost all unionist, and their selective reporting, and then those that people elect into positions of trust just blatantly lying, I really do despair. And it does come back, Andrew, to what Alison said. We need Scotland to be an independent nation for the well-being and future of all our own citizens, but also to shine a path for our neighbours to say, you know what, it doesn't have to be that way. You can have things different. And that for me is the crux of independence, is making our own decisions. Secondary to that is saying, look, people are capable of doing this, and we can make our own decisions and forge our own paths. Please join us in doing that.
Absolutely, Linda. Thank you. That's a very positive way of looking at it. Rather more positive than I was feeling, perhaps, in the circumstances, having just read that story. We've got another way of looking at the effect of the Tory government on people with our next item, because some low-paid workers on universal credit have missed out on the government's first cost of living payment because of payroll quirks that removed the benefit entitlement during the key window set by the government. Universal credit is calculated on a monthly basis, but for people who are paid weekly, there are 4 months in the year when universal credit is based on 5 rather than 4 weeks' pay, and for some claimants, this results in them receiving no universal credit payment in that month. To receive the second cost of living payment worth £324, which will be paid in the autumn, you had to be eligible for universal credit payment in an assessment period that ended between 26 April and 25th of May. The government website warns that you won't receive the support if your earnings reduce the benefit to zero in this key window. The Department for Work and Pensions insists that the vast majority of existing recipients of universal credit will qualify for a cost of living payment, but inevitably a small number will be ineligible on the qualification dates because of a change of income, earnings, or circumstance. Now, putting to one side for a moment, Linda, the fact that the Department of Work and Pensions is apparently happy that anybody doesn't get the benefits to which they would properly be entitled. One person suffering is too many. But putting that to one side for a moment, just for a moment, I've managed not to be quoting George Orwell for a couple of weeks, but this sounds just like Kafka. is black and white parables where instead of buoyancy, there is only the heavy slogging of nightmarish struggle, and instead of joy, there is only the chugging political machinery mindlessly controlling everything, signifying a bureaucracy that has severed all connection with human need. Is it fair to say what universal credit is doing to some people is Kafkaesque?
Absolutely. And I have to say, Andrew, I think I myself used the phrase or the word Kafkaesque in something I put out about it at the time, because this has been going on for ages. This is not a new thing. I mean, that's what, a year and a half since I retired, but I had a string of letters to the DWP. I think it was over two ministers, um, and even Ian Duncan Smith as well, who I don't want to talk about any further, so we'll just park him, the architect of it all. This has been going on since universal credit started, and it's this issue about some people getting paid 4 weekly, and therefore there are some months in which they get two salaries. So the UK government have known since day one that this was an issue and have chosen to do nothing about it. Even to the ridiculous extent, there's some companies who in December and January will alter their wage dates to try and make life a bit more even for people rather than have that big gap in January. And they were unable to do it because it meant people's universal credit entitlement would be axed. It is completely ludicrous. It is fixable. They have chosen not to fix it. And any responses I got after we proved it to be the case, because they argued with me that it didn't happen, after we proved it to be the case, they came out with exactly the same line as, oh, it's very few people. Therefore, it doesn't matter. It's back to the very basic. They don't give a toss. They don't care.
I think you're absolutely right, Linda. It certainly feels like that, and this is just another example of it. And we'll certainly not talk about Duncan Smith because it's Friday. We've had enough of him this week. So let's look at let's contrast what we've just been talking about with the Scottish Government's plan of action on the cost of living emergency, because yesterday the First Minister chaired the Scottish Government Resilience Committee to discuss the urgent steps to mitigate the growing cost of living emergency, which is affecting people and businesses. Ministers assessed the current situation and likely scenarios in the months ahead and agreed a number of immediate actions. The Scottish Government will continue to maximise the direct financial assistance available to those most in need, principally through ongoing work to extend eligibility for and increase the value of the Scottish Child Payment. And the government will undertake an emergency budget review to assess any and all opportunities to redirect additional resources to those most in need, reducing the burdens on businesses and stimulating our economy in Scotland. They will consider urgently all options within devolved powers for regulatory action to limit increases in costs for people, businesses and other organisations. They will bring together energy companies, banks and food retailers to examine what further help can be provided by these businesses to limit cost increases and protect those most vulnerable. The government will work with partners to strengthen the safety net of emergency food and fuel provision, prioritising a cash-first approach, and will provide further advice to households on using energy more efficiently and reducing consumption. So the Scottish Government Resilience Committee plans to meet on a weekly basis for the foreseeable future to oversee and direct progress on these immediate actions and keep under ongoing review any further steps that our government can take. In addition to doing everything possible within its power, the Scottish Government has said it will be renewing its call for urgent and substantial action from the UK Government, including, firstly, an immediate doubling of the direct financial support already provided, with payments made in October. It is estimated that for an out-of-work couple with 2 children, the payments already announced by the UK Government fall about £1,600 short of meeting the recent changes to benefits and living costs, a gap that will have to be filled. Secondly, the cancellation of the forthcoming increase in the energy price cap, followed by urgent work between the government and energy companies on energy market reform and associated financing options to ensure sustainable costs for consumers in the long term. Next, the urgent introduction of an energy price cap for small and medium enterprises. support for business to prevent closures due to energy price rises, and investment in economic stimulus to minimise the scale of the projected recession, a further windfall tax to ensure nationalisation of the profits being made out of the current pressures, and finally, the additional funding to support public sector pay increases and protect the recovery of public services after the pandemic. So, Linda, my apologies. That was a long list of things there, but I thought it was worthwhile that we laid them all out in detail, both the steps that the Scottish Government is taking and the strong requests that the Scottish Government is making of Westminster to start doing something. But what stood out, first of all, to me from the reporting was that our Scottish Resilience Committee is now going to meet on a weekly basis for the foreseeable future to oversee and direct progress and keep matters under review and review any further steps the Scottish Government can take. So is that step, activating the committee on a weekly basis, is that for show, or does it instead indicate the expected scale of the crisis?
Well, I think it indicates the scale of the crisis. I don't think it's for show because one thing about Nicola Sturgeon, and indeed John Swinney as well, as her deputy, is they know how to kick things into action. They insist on action. They don't leave anything in the laissez-faire attitude that we're seeing from the Tory government at the moment. Um, they they have a deep held and deeply felt sense of responsibility to try and mitigate hard times for people as far as possible. And I think that's when you get right down to it with all of this, that's the important word. It's mitigate. And isn't it awful that we have a government in our country that all they can do is mitigate? Because the big powers are all with Westminster. And, Nicola said the other day there's 700,000 households facing fuel poverty. That's 30% households in Scotland facing fuel poverty. Yet she can't get a commitment from the UK government to sit down with her and with Mark Drakeford in Wales to talk about how we best deal with these things. Absolutely appalling. So I'm not at all surprised that the Resilience Committee or the Resilience Room in the Parliaments has agreed to meet weekly, and that'll be weekly formal meetings. But I also know that Nicola Sturgeon will be on the phone day and daily to all different cabinet secretaries and senior civil servants, keeping her finger on the pulse and demanding to know what's happening and what we can do. But it's not going to be easy. It's back to that word mitigate. I think the Scottish Government have already done some really powerful things in terms of the Scottish Child Payment, etc. Um, and it doesn't come easy. They're now talking about this emergency budget. The priority has to be helping those most in need. One of my big concerns is that Scottish Parliament, ergo the government, does work on a budget that's fixed. Other than some of the consequentials that come from Westminster on additional public expenditure. So when you spend in one area, something has to give in another. And I just wish that the opposition would recognise what the SNP and Green government is doing, which is taking the responsibility to try and help those most in need, and wouldn't just sit in the sidelines and wait for an issue to come up elsewhere and have a go at it. I would like to see everybody working together. If we can't get Westminster working along with involved administrations to try and help everybody within the UK settlement, surely the opposition in Holyrood, in Scotland, should have the decency to step up and say, right, okay, let's see what we can best do in Scotland, and we're on board. I find it very, very sad. All they want to do is the SNP bad scenario.
Thanks, Linda. Your point, I think, is very well made there. Responsibility, recognising, accepting, and acting on responsibility to help is something that we see from the Scottish Government, and that is in sharp contrast to what the either indolence or incompetence that we're experiencing from Westminster. But let's look a little bit more at the interaction between Westminster and Scottish politics, because ahead of Keir Starmer's visit to Edinburgh earlier today, the SNP has challenged Mr Starmer to show respect for Scottish democracy and to abandon his party's alliance with the Tories. The Labour leader is in the capital appearing in Ian Dale's All Talk show at the EICC as part of the Edinburgh Festival. And the SNP has said that Mr Starmer should use this visit to do the right thing and show his respect for the democratic mandate that exists for an independence referendum, as his predecessor Jeremy Corbyn did earlier this week. Commenting, the SNP MSP Paul McLennan said, "From supporting Brexit, doing dodgy council deals with the Tories, and blocking Scotland's right to hold a referendum, how the Labour Party leader can look people in Scotland in the eye whilst ignoring their voice is beyond me. If Starmer wants to salvage any shred of integrity, then it's time for him to abandon Labour's alliance with the Tories and respect Scotland's right to have a say over its future." Starmer's visit coincides with Scottish Labour and Conservative members of COSLA voting against SNP proposals for a 5% pay increase for council workers. Following the £140 million provided to COSLA by the Scottish Government last week, Labour and Tory council leaders have today voted down plans which would have allowed a 5% pay increase to be offered to council employee unions. That means that has reduced the current offer to 3.5%. Councillor Douglas Reid, who's the SNP COSLA leaders co-convener, said, "Today's outcome is in no way adequate, and the SNP group in COSLA is disappointed that an increased pay offer to unions is not now being put forward right now. At a time when so many hard-working people are worried about rising bills and increasingly relying on local services, we should be prioritising getting around the table with the unions so the situation can move forwards with what we believe to be a credible increased pay offer." The SNP MSP Bill Kidd said the SNP and government and COSLA have done their part, and it is deeply disappointing but painfully unsurprising that Scottish Labour and the Tories have cozied up to sell out their hard-working employees that support our councils. And whilst we've been on air, the Cabinet Secretary, Shona Robertson, has issued a statement. She says, "It's extremely disappointing, quite significant additional resources we've made available, more than half the amount that COSLA asked us for in order to make a 5% offer. We understand there is only a 3.5% on the table. We urge COSLA to urgently reconsider its position to avoid industrial action." She went on to say, "COSLA recognised this was not an issue for the Scottish Government to solve in its entirety. It has got to be a partnership, which means local authorities must look at every possible area of finance to come to a fair and affordable pay offer for staff, which avoids damaging industrial action." So I was going to talk to you about the Ian Dale story and Keir Starmer being in Edinburgh, but to be fair, I think the COSLA story is really rather more important, both in terms of the politics and in terms of the impact on the pay packets of council workers. So how do you think it's going to play now that's apparent that well, it's certainly not in terms of benefiting the workers, the Labour Party and the Tories are working together to stymie COSLA and the Scottish Government's attempt to put together a financing package, which, as you say, arises in circumstances where the amount of money available is finite because of the way in which Scotland is funded. How is it going to play with voters when they see both Labour voters and Tory voters, when they see them collaborating with the opposition, you would think, and the people that really suffer are council workers?
Well, sadly, I think the phrase that Bill Kidd used summed it up, really, which is deeply disappointing but painfully unsurprising. This fellowship of Tory and Labour, which is now quite openly admitted. I mean, the latest stuff in North Lanarkshire Council, regardless of all the circumstances that are there, and there are many of them, the fact that the Tory spokesperson, I can't remember which particular suit it was, said, well, we made a commitment, we would do everything we could to stop the SNP getting control in local government. Really? How are they making a commitment to the people that are the service users of local government and expect better than this? So, yeah, they now have this unholy alliance, the Tories and Labour, and indeed the Lib Dems, but they jump about anywhere anyway, really. So I think people are starting to see through it. When I look at this decision not to start off negotiations with 5%, but to start it off with 3.5. I'm afraid I can't come to any conclusion other than the Tories and Labour in their coalition that they refuse to call coalition actually want public sector strikes. They don't give a minute's thought to the effect this will have either on the general public who will lack services or indeed on the workers who may well lose out quite a lot financially. They want strikes because all they want is to disrupt the SNP. Now, we saw it in the run up to the local authority elections. My own opinion that I formed was that there was a deliberate tactic from Labour in Glasgow to force strikes through COP26 and then through the local authority elections because they thought it would benefit them electorally. So it's all about gaining and maintaining power, and to do that, they feel they have to stop the SNP, the successful and well respected SNP. So, as Bill Kidd said, deeply disappointing, painfully unsurprising, and I think it's absolutely disgusting behaviour by all of them.
Thanks, Linda. Yes, your former colleague Bill Kidd's analysis sounds pretty strong to me, and certainly I'm going to be adopting your analysis of the Fellowship of the Doomed and the Unholy Alliance from now on as this story continues to unfold. But let's move back to looking at energy again, because there's another story that we've heard from HMRC today. Energy exports from the UK to the Netherlands rocketed by 67% in June, official figures reveal, in the latest sign of Europe's scramble to reduce its dependence on Russian oil and gas. UK exports of fossil fuels more than doubled in value in June compared with the same period last year, the latest trading data from HMRC shows. More than £1 billion worth of that went to the Netherlands, which is home to some of the continent's biggest gas storage facilities. These figures come as countries across Europe rush to bank energy supplies for the winter, as Russia restricts flows of gas via its Nord Stream 1 pipeline in an apparent attempt to press them to drop their support for Ukraine. Dutch natural gas storage facilities were filled to 50% of their capacity at the end of June, about 2 months earlier than normal. The filling of the facilities accelerated in May when the Dutch government offered a €400 million subsidy to gas companies to fill the storage facilities during the summer. HMRC's figures do not specify the original source of the UK's energy exports, but show a near tripling in fossil fuel imports in the second quarter of 2022 compared with the same period in 2021, with nearly £5 billion more imported in June 22 than in the same month last year. This suggests that a large proportion of the exports could include oil and liquefied natural gas brought into UK ports that was then immediately sent on abroad. So, Linda, there's probably two things. The more important point I was going to ask you about is this, given the profits that oil and gas majors are making at the moment, is this apparent trading in oil and gas in particular, does this sound to you like there's a risk that what's happening is that they're being exported at summer prices and we're going to have to buy it back at winter prices, increasing the profits for oil and gas majors again?
Do you know, Andrew, I hadn't thought of that, but no, that wouldn't surprise me in the slightest when we see that happening. I did read a bit of the background into this, and the Netherlands, I understand, only have, even with what they've currently just purchased, they will have 50% capacity within their storage facility. So there's obviously a lot of worry across mainland Europe about oil and gas. It's interesting though, you know, that quarters figure when it's gone up, and the way it's reported, it's not sort of reported that this is oil and gas that's been brought into the UK and then forwarded on. So I think that's interesting, back to what you say, because that's part of that buying and selling and commodity. And there will be shareholders sitting there looking at the prices as they rise and fall by the hour and trying to make profits. So, you know, back to that old saw, which was see who's making the money here. So there's a bit of that going on. But the other thing that was interesting was they had announced this figure for the quarter, But we looked into it further. Some of the analysis is showing that it was the first 2 months that were quite good. Then there was a big fall in the third month of that quarter. So June wasn't so great. So the figure shouldn't be applauded as the UK government are applauding it as anything particularly good. The other interesting figures that were there is that apart from oil and gas, overall exports from the UK were up 16.3% to the EU. And to the rest of the world, they were only up 8%. And it struck me that, you know, this Brexit that nobody talks about now, because Brexit's not had any effect, according to the UK government and the mainstream media, even though you can see all sorts of effects day and daily, is that we're still exporting a lot to the EU, which we were told pre-Brexit that the entire world was going to open up to UK. And what was it? We're going to be sending cheese to France and fridges to Greenland, all sorts of wonderful things. But we're still very much dependent on the EU for exports. And it also brought me back to think exports, imports. What the heck's happening about the Northern Ireland Protocol? Because I've not heard anything about that for ages. So back to that complete inaction by the UK government and this circus of the leadership competition. Nothing's happening. Nobody's looking after stuff. And meanwhile, they're just creeping things in, and nobody knows what's going on. It's
Yeah,
absolutely appalling.
absolutely, Linda. The inaction and indolence in Westminster is astonishing. But let's move
Yeah.
to Florida now for our next item, because FBI
Oh,
agents were looking for
sounds
secret
nice,
documents.
Andrew.
The FBI were looking for secret documents about nuclear weapons, among other classified material, when they searched Donald Trump's home on Monday, according to the Washington Post. Post report said that nuclear weapons documents were believed to be among the documents that the FBI was hunting for at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. They did not specify what kind of documents or whether they referred to weapons belonging to the US or another country. The report comes hours after the Attorney General Merrick Garland said he had personally authorized the government request for a search warrant and revealed the Justice Department had asked a Florida court for the warrant to be unsealed, noting that Trump himself had made the search public. The court told the government to present its motion to Trump's lawyers and to report back by 3 p.m. on Friday on whether Trump objected to the warrant being unsealed. That'll be about 8 p.m. UK time. Several US national media outlets, including the New York Times, CBS, and the Post, CNN, and NBC, have asked the court to unseal everything related to the search at Mar-a-Lago. The suspected presence of nuclear weapons documents at Mar-a-Lago could explain why Garland took such a politically charged step as ordering FBI agents into a former president's house, as retrieving them would be seen as a national security priority. In his book on the Trump presidency, Rage, Bob Woodward quoted the former president as telling him, "We have stuff that you haven't even seen or heard about. We have stuff that Putin and Xi have never heard about before. There's nobody. What we have is incredible." And it's a good point, Linda, because Trump was particularly fixated on the US nuclear arsenal when he was in the White House. He boasted about being privy to highly secret information. In the summer of 2017, he told US military leaders he wanted an arsenal comparable to the US Cold War peak, which would involve a tenfold increase. Now, that was a demand that reportedly led the then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson to describe the president, and I quote, as a fucking moron. Trump publicly threatened to obliterate both North Korea and Afghanistan. Firstly, Linda, was Rex Tillerson's analysis of his former boss, President Trump, correct?
Yes, I'm in no doubt about that. um, I've given up reading stuff about this man because I actually found it very upsetting that a country like the US could not only have elected that man, but could have had a sizable portion of it in support of that man. And I say sizable portion rather than vast majority because of the low turnout that there are in elections in the US. There's more lethargy and apathy than anything else, it would appear. It's just horrifying. And, you know, I haven't read Bob Woodward's book Read yet, and I'll get myself round to actually doing that. But it makes me think back to the 70s. And I'm not so old that I lived the 70s with great political awareness, I have to say. It's retrospect. I had a vague awareness of what was going on at the time. But when you look at Watergate and Nixon and everything else, and then you look at potentially what Trump's done, you think, Watergate, was that it? Really? Um, and it's just really bizarre where America has gone in terms of Trump, in terms of some of the right wing stuff going on there just now, the behaviour of the Republicans in the Senate, the behaviour of some of the state legislators, the erosion of women's rights, the erosion of minority rights, indeed, the erosion of most people's rights, except for a very few elite. It's absolutely horrifying. And I don't think for a minute that Trump caused this. I think he capitalised on something that was already happening for whatever reason and managed. Who knows how he managed, because he's not the sharpest. Who's behind him? There's an awful lot in there. He managed to just bring that to a peak that America is now suffering. And I was particularly horrified. We complain about the mainstream press in the UK, as rightly we should. But I saw an article in about Fox News this morning where they had actually dummied up a photograph to discredit the director of the FBI. And it's horrible. And if that kind of thing is allowed to happen, I mean, I'm one that says, on one hand, you can't have any censoring of the press, but see when they're blatantly lying and falsifying, there has to be some kind of sanction. I don't know, some way of making sure that that's put right and that people know it's not true. And Trump's current carry on, the way he's behaving and the way he's being allowed to behave by a lot of people round about him, is not giving me any comfort whatsoever.
Absolutely, Linda. And actually, in terms of reading about Trump, there was another book I was going to mention because Trump's notorious for not reading. In Michael Wolff's book, Fire and Fury, Wolff says that Trump didn't process information in any conventional sense. He didn't read. And he quotes the economic advisor, Gary Cohn, who wrote an email in the White House saying, "It's worse than you can imagine. Trump won't read anything, not one-page memos, nothing." So if Trump doesn't read, why is he allegedly storing boxes and boxes of documents which don't belong to him? What do you think is the value of those documents to Trump?
Because he just believes he has the right to do so. I, I don't think the man has any ethics or morality at all. Um, he's, I mean, you could go to one end of the scale and say, it's like a Superman movie and it's Lex Luthor. No, you could go to the other end of the scale and say this is a completely inadequate individual who thinks he can do anything he wants. And probably what's more worrying than Trump himself are those round about him that let him behave that way. And I recently read a book which I won't go into, which was supposed to be the psychology of Trump and where he came from. Some of it was quite interesting. And, there is a picture of someone who's very, very good at projecting success. And actually, when you look behind it, there's no success there at all. But that has created a dependency of other people upon him for their own status. And these people have got no ethics or morals either because they keep him there because it suits their own ends.
I think that's absolutely right, Linda. There's an industry now surrounding Trump that doesn't seem to be slowing down. Let's come
Mm.
back to Scotland now for the next item, because a new exhibition exploring the legacies of the British Empire has opened at the University of St Andrews Wardlaw Museum. Recollecting Empire presents objects from the university's own collections alongside perspectives from individuals and partner groups, that help to improve understanding of the countries and cultures from which the items came. Exhibits include a copy of the Quran which once belonged to the Sultan of Mysore, a Tibetan stone, a Chinese bell used in sacred ceremonies, and a statue of a Buddhist monk. The contributions alongside them include personal reflections, annotations, and quotes, as well as creative responses such as poetry or art, seeking to foreground voices and perspectives that have often been excluded. The exhibition is funded by Museum Galleries Scotland and is a collaboration with Dr. Emma Bond of the university's School of Modern Languages. She has extensive experience working with Scottish museums to reassess their colonial legacies and sits on the Decolonising Advisory Board of the V&A Dundee. Dr. Bond said, "The Recollecting Empire exhibition opens at a time when museums and galleries across the UK and beyond are rethinking how best to care for objects in their collections that were acquired during periods of colonial rule. Multiple voices must be involved in these important conversations in order for museums to be able to move forward in more equitable ways." Now, Linda, the exhibition website quotes from Sir Winston Churchill, no less. The quotation is, "If the British Empire is fated to pass from life into history, we must hope it will not be by the slow process of dispersion and decay, but in some supreme exertion for freedom, for right, and for truth." So, is it fair to say that the tail end of the empire is still in slow decay? And Linda, is it about time for a supreme exertion for freedom in Scotland to perhaps bring the empire finally to an end?
That's funny, Andrew, when you said that, because I haven't heard that quote before. I thought that might actually be one of the most opposite things that Churchill said. Because, yes, I'm going to look it up. I'd like you to send me a copy of that. I rather like that. Yeah, I
I
think
will
it
do.
is. I think it is in slow decay. Mainly because there's been a complete non-acceptance of the decline of empire by the Brits. And I think it was back in the 60s that an American, my memory is failing me, Dean somebody, an American fellow who was prominent at the time, said something along the lines that the UK, or Britain, I think he probably said, maybe even England, um, had lost their empire or was losing their empire and they didn't quite know what to do next. I'm paraphrasing very much here. And I think that's right. They've never come to terms with the fact that life had changed, civilizations have moved on, and UK, Britain has never got itself a proper role. Um, so, yeah, gosh, it's not often I would say that Churchill was right, but there we go, Churchill was right.
It,
And
they,
Scotland is going to be the catalyst for change.
the quotation caught my attention as well. That's why I had to speak and talk to you about it this evening, because I've never heard of it either. But it struck me as a great quotation, and I will go and I'll dig it up and I'll certainly send it to you. But time's against us this evening, Linda. So let's go to our final story quickly, because Glasgow is on the 7-city shortlist to host the 2023 Eurovision Song Contest, along with Birmingham, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, and Sheffield. The cities making it onto the list were announced by Scott Mills on Zoe Ball's Radio 2 breakfast show this morning. Ukraine's Kalush Orchestra won this year's Eurovision in Turin, so Ukraine should have been the 2023 hosts. However, the European Broadcasting Union announced that next year's contest would have to be relocated because of the war. As runner-up in 2022, the UK was asked to host the 67th Eurovision. Our First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, tweeted, "It's got to be Glasgow." Bookies William Hill seem to agree, as they are listing Glasgow at 4-5 odds on favourite. Glasgow City Council leader Susan Aiken said she was delighted. Delivering such a unique event in such a short timescale presents a challenge, but Glasgow has an unrivaled track record for successfully hosting major global events, and we're confident we can present a Eurovision that reflects a true celebration of Ukrainian culture. The BBC will announce the final decision on the venue in the autumn. So, Linda, a quick question. What do you think would be the best thing about Eurovision being hosted in Glasgow in May 2023?
Do you know, I haven't watched Eurovision since Lulu won it. I have never understood the hype. However, the best thing, and Susan Aitken's quite right, Glasgow has a uh, long legacy of hosting great events. The best thing could happen would be more people coming to Glasgow and our wonderful city of Glasgow being showcased again to the world. Yeah.
Thank you, Linda. That sums it up perfectly. And I'm sure in the same way you're supporting the First Minister insofar as it's got to be Glasgow, as she said, as she tweeted this morning.
As long as I don't have to go.
I'm sure that won't be the case, but thank you, Linda, because that is all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to continue to develop the station and to make new programmes for you. If you can support us, then please subscribe or donate to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. You will find that our appeals for financial assistance have not gone away because the need for that support has not gone away. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you can find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Meantime, we will be here again on Sunday with the next edition of the Full Scottish, so please tune in at 12 noon and join us again then. And that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. So a very special thanks to our very special guest this evening, Linda Fabiani. Thanks, Linda. Not a great deal happened on the 12th of August in Scottish history. So, having just been discussing Donald Trump, I thought it was probably worthy to note that on this day in 1930 in Chicago, Al Capone's liquor business and headquarters were stormed by the police on the orders of Judge H. Lyle. I hope that you don't have the FBI chapping on your door this weekend and instead have a great time. And you can join us again here on Broadcasting Scotland very soon. Bye-bye.